Strange Birds by HeyJude19. Summary. Her gaze is encouraging, and Draco can do nothing but linger on the precipice of terrible want with remarkable self-restraint. She's right here, solid and real and welcoming, slipping through his undeserving fingers. Is he allowed a trauma timeline? He has no idea when it's appropriate for him to reach suffering's endpoint and move on. He's a thestral with a beating, wounded wing, still desperate to fly for her. To her. A Dramione fanfiction. It's nonsensical how it happens. Her crush on Draco Malfoy. A combined 7th, 8th year potion curriculum requires work in groups of 4. They're a natural trio, and he's an outcast. Thus, Professor Slughorn gestures impatiently at their table when it's clear no one else will have him. Ron rolls his eyes. Harry and Hermione offer a nod, and Malfoy returns them. No one says anything for the first few classes besides, "I'm done slicing." "How many stairs?" "What of leeches, I'll grabs him." But during the 5th class, Malfoy snaps. He sets down his knife sharply, almost a slam. "That's enough, I cannot do this." Hermione is expecting a tantrum about being forced to work with them, but Malfoy's fury is directed at Harry's hands. "Potter, you are menacing those roots. It's an abomination. Hand them over. I cannot abide any more crimes of this magnitude." Ron and Hermione watch slack-jawed as Harry dutifully slides his cutting board across the table and Malfoy deftly chops the roots. It's a precise concentration involving scrunched brows, pursed lips, and careful yet quick fingers. "Honestly, this is a first-year skill. Weren't you some sort of potion prodigy in 6th year?" "Yep," Harry says with a shrug. "Because I cheated." The nonchalant confession reshapes Malfoy's fury. You? Malfoy sputters before turning to Hermione. "I knew he couldn't beat you on his own." Hermione blinks. Words fail her. He's never complimented her before, obviously, unless one counts his lack of insults at the jewel ball in 4th year as a compliment. She doesn't. This is new. Perhaps feeling the weight of 3 surprised sets of eyes, Malfoy blushes and returns to his silent task. Plenty of things about Malfoy are new. The inconspicuous way he walks through corridors, slipping into classes at the last possible second. Sitting at the end of the Slytherin table with only Theodore Nott for company. He's full up on behaviors, indicating he'd like to be left alone. "You stab Malfoy a lot," Ron observes one morning at breakfast. "And," she retorts, "you stare at Daphne Greengrass." Ron mutters something sheepish and reddens to the tip of his ears. She knows the comment on Malfoy isn't born of jealousy. One kiss in the heat of war does not make a successful romantic relationship, but she hates the protective edge to it all the same. She can look or not look at Malfoy all she likes, and Hermione finds she likes to look. It's Harry, of course, who breaks the ice. Instead of suffocating under the silence while they wait for their potion to boil, Harry strikes up conversation with Ron. At the first instance of Quidditch, Hermione sees the minute signs of Malfoy's attention shift from reading the textbook in his lap to the boy's chatter. He draws his bottom lip between his teeth. He does this when he wants to say something but has since learned the art of holding his tongue. She knows that when his teeth eventually release it, the flesh will be almost red, artificially rosier than normal due to natural paleness. Like her, Malfoy hunches when reading, but Harry and Ron's sport talk straightens his spine. His grey eyes no longer slide back and forth to read, and Hermione sees them brighten in interest. She sees this because she's noticing him quite a bit lately. Now he's just another boy interested in Quidditch, something palatable about the person he used to be. The war sanded down everything about him, his posture, voice, spirit, but this trait he allows to seep back into his personality. "Malfoy," Harry suddenly calls, "how is your team again?" Though he jumps slightly at being addressed included, he automatically replies, "Full mouth." A beat of silence before Ron scowls. Hermione thinks Harry might have stepped on his toes. "They always recruit the best chasers," Ron grunts. "You usually see them on the national team. Pity that hasn't helped England win a cup title in 2 decades? 2.5, Ron growls. Harry shoots Hermione a covert grin. She doesn't know how to return. She resumes her study of Malfoy, even as he retreats back into his shell when class ends. Malfoy never initiates conversation, but haltingly replies when Harry invites his opinion, or if Hermione asks him a question during their project. Ron contributes to the civility by not being openly hostile. The assignment may be rubbish, but Hermione wants it done properly, and her friends show actual maturity by conceding to research outside of class. Their generosity does have limits, so while they may humor Hermione by tagging along and reading through books, their attention inevitably wanders after roughly 30 minutes. Today it lasts less than 10 minutes. The most gorgeous of fall days beckons outside the library windows. They crane their necks towards it every few seconds, desperate to catch a glimpse of Ginny's new squad in her inaugural practice as Gryffindor's captain. "Oh, go on, you two," Hermione says to a restless Harry and Ron. They flash boyish grins and waste no time gathering their things and darting out of the library. "You can go too if you like," Hermione offers to Malfoy. When he says, "Oh, I'd rather stay," to her permission for departure, she tries to ignore the gratifying thrill that accompanies his choice. She didn't think he'd join the three of them initially, counted on a refusal actually, when she extended the invitation to her group's library session. Instead he nodded, asked for time, and showed up for every meeting. It takes him 3 tries, 3 separate meetings where they've been left alone together before he broaches a topic unrelated to homework. "I was desperate." She looks up and meets his stare. "In the room of hidden things," he clarifies, "at the battle." "I know." "And at the manor, No," Hermione says at once. "You don't get to talk about that night." She's not harsh or unkind, but assertive that the trauma from that night is hers. He's only a blip at her memory's edge from that anyway. To Malfoy's credit, he doesn't look away nor appear offended by her refusal to discuss it. "An aspiration I can understand," Hermione continues, "but I won't excuse or tolerate the person you were for years before that point." Hermione faces the table again and reviews her notes for their final brew. She's about to redirect to safer waters when Malfoy clears his throat. "The Transfiguration lesson today on malleable metals. What did you think?" His tone is light, sincere in its polite inquisitiveness. "I think it's a trickier concept than most perceive." "People assume. Easy when transfiguring inanimate materials." "Exactly. But just because you don't have to account for a skeletal structure doesn't make it less complicated." "Elemental compatibility plays a large role." She indulges in a tentative smile that he doesn't return, but dips his chin to acknowledge their shared agreement on a subject. Hermione sees the segue for what it is, a revelation of whom Malfoy might have been given a chance. A backbone. Or both. She realizes after a few of these conversations what they actually could be to one another. He's had years of Crabbe and Goyle for company, hardly the best choice for intellectual discussion. She's had Harry and Ron, and they'd rather discuss just about anything other than schoolwork. They sit side by side, even when Harry and Ron don't join them. It's easier to share this way, both perching on the edge of their seats to bend their heads over the text. Sometimes their arms pressed together by virtue of these positions. Hermione's always been a fairly confident individual, particularly about learning, and now that she's got a willing audience, it only dials up her passion. Enthusiasm manifests a certain way in Hermione. It's physical. "And did you know," she leans forward and puts her hand on his knee, "when you research the original Draught of Peace recipe, you'll find its only ingredient shy of inducing aggression instead. Fascinating, isn't it? How sometimes there's only these." She gestures her hand about, then drops it back to his knee. "Thin lines between polar opposite ideals?" She squeezes his leg and then releases it. He tenses, blushes, and sputters out a question about her biology lesson. And Hermione is a goner. It's ludicrous how it happens, his crush on Hermione Granger. Draco blames Potter because blaming Potter for everything inconvenient is a habit he'll never break. Potter with his declaration of détente by way of Quidditch talk. He was quite content ignoring the trio and suffering through this blasted project, but he supposes Potter couldn't resist rescuing someone. Granger is wary at first, as is her right, but she comes around, and then suddenly he's rolling down a hill at a terrifying, likely life-ending speed. Even fucking Weasley tolerates his presence. Draco, who expected to be scorned, tortured, or both, finds his 8th year at Hogwarts almost serene. It seems this castle of traumatized students would rather just finally concentrate on being irresponsible adolescents instead of soldiers. Potter would rather be snogging Ginny at every opportunity, and Weasley prefers to coast. They'll coast right into aura training, and Draco doesn't fault them for it. If he were a war hero with noble deeds to his name, he'd do the same. Granger lets it slide too. She no longer nags her friends the way she's infamously done in years past, because now Granger has a study partner on her intellectual level, or at least close to her level. Their little friendship, he supposes, began with his bungled excuse for former awfulness. It grows due to forced proximity, matched wits, and his willingness to exhibit genuine excitement as opposed to faint disdain for his education. And fuck if she doesn't latch onto his newly discovered authenticity with grace and then fervor. Her acceptance is attractive enough, as is the rest of her, if he's honest, but it's the touching that does him in. Granger knows the Hogwarts library like the back of her hand, so it's not unusual for her to exclaim, "I know which text we need," and rush off, but not before she blanks out his brain. Her hand slides up his arm, lands on his shoulder, uses it as a leverage to push herself to standing. You've seen her do this with Potter and Weasley more than once, casually touch them. They don't react, and why would they? This is normal, platonic behavior for them. For Draco, it threatens to crumble his resolve to seclude, study, graduate, then shut himself away in Malfoy Manor and figure out how the fuck to be an adult. But now the plan is partially shot to shit because he really rather enjoys present company as they both jot down notes for an upcoming astronomy exam. Their scribbling swatty symphony of quills against parchment gets interrupted by their poor choice of seating arrangement. Their hands collide. Left-handed and right-handed. Another complementary angle to their dynamic. Not opposition, as he'd once believed. Draco pulls away slowly, playing a delicate game. If he moves too quickly, she'll assume the worst of his beliefs. He deliberately moves his hand back, choosing instead to keep eye contact. "We should switch spots," he suggests. When they sit again, he maintains their former closeness, not just to reassure Granger of a few monumental philosophical shifts, but also because he fucking craves it at this point. The first Quidditch game of the year should inspire excitement, or at the very least nostalgia for Draco. But the nostalgia is tainted because the returning older students can't play for house teams. Reclaiming the pitch for traumatic memories inspires a surge of house spirit culminating in peak frivolity. Male students paint their faces. Some of the more bold paint their chests only to be reprimanded by McGonagall. Almost every girl has a ribbon tied in plaits or ponytail. Draco thinks everyone looks ridiculous and chooses the empty library over witnessing the nonsense. Granger offers to join him, which inspires something annoyingly close to joy in his chest before he sees her hair. "Why are you wearing that?" he says in greeting. She bristles. "Lots of girls are. It seemed like a fun idea, even if I don't watch the match." Draco glares at the scarlet ribbon wrapped tightly around her massive mane, restricted in a bun atop her head. The stupid thing is choking the life out of her hair. "You're not a ribbon girl." She reels back, offended, because they don't do this. They study, they debate, and sometimes she touches him and tries to quell anything resembling hope. They don't do much personal talk, not yet. He has no right to offer an opinion on her attire. "And just what is that supposed to mean?" "Conformity doesn't suit you. You shouldn't want to look like everyone else." "There's nothing wrong with conformity." "Actually, I think you'll find I'm particularly opposed to the idea." Draco gets up, leaving that coveted warmth of their thighs pressed together. His theatrics lead him down a row of books where he can sulk and pine in peace. He doesn't even know which section he is in, but he leans against the shelf to wait until she leaves. Granger doesn't, of course. She follows, so she can stand opposite him and huff. "No need to be so dramatic. You have a point, and it's already giving me a headache." She concedes to him by pulling at the ribbon, trying to remove it. The way she yanks at her hair looks painful, and Draco doesn't like seeing her grimace in pain. It reminds him of shrieked curses, screams, disappointing parents, and body-numbing fear. "Stop that, hold still," he says impatiently. Draco steps forward and reaches for her hair. She hisses and winces at her first tug, then braces her hand on his chest. This touch slows down everything, and he takes more care with the task she's entrusting to him. He concentrates on undoing the knot without tangling her hair farther, and he soon sets it free. The curls fall en masse as his hands drop to his sides. Granger's hands remain on his chest. He's still breathing, which is interesting because it's taking a ridiculous amount of effort to do so. Despite the struggle to continue living, it feels fucking fantastic. Especially when she moves her finger towards each other. To the center of his chest, then outward again. Up they ravel to his shoulders, down to his biceps, back to his shoulders. Granger stops exploring, settling there. Her gaze is encouraging, and Draco can do nothing but linger on the precipice of terrible want with remarkable self-restraint. She's right here, solid and real and welcoming, slipping through his undeserving fingers. Is he allowed a trauma timeline? He has no idea when it's appropriate for him to reach suffering's endpoint and move on. He's a thestral with a beating wounded wing, still desperate to fly for her, to her. He succumbed to his feelings, but touching he can and should resist. Draco twines and twists the ribbon in his hand for want of something else to touch. "Forgive me," he whispers, hoping she knows how much those 2 words encompass. They spend a time period from age 11 to now, when he once again falls short of expectations. He leaves her, pocketing the ribbon as he walks away. They resume their normal study habits, and Draco hopes she'll forget all about his cowardice until he's confronted by a different source. She's gone to fetch something from the potions cupboard when Weasley, of all people, tells Draco to sort his shit. "You're making Hermione sad," he states baldly, for his usual lack of manners. "Not on purpose," Draco defends himself. "Ambiguity stresses her out. Make up your mind." He grimaces and reluctantly adds, "She already has." Except Draco can't offer her anything more, not just yet. He doles out anecdotes instead, glimpses of himself, so she can make a more informed decision about the person he is. He starts with speaking about his mother, the more redeemable parent. She'll be out of Azkaban around the end of school. Granger listens attentively and even offers to send Narcissa some reading material. Draco eventually brings up Lucius, which is a safer topic than he anticipates. Probably because his father has a decade to spend away, and so a reunion between father and son is a distant concept for now. Granger does not offer anything but a sympathetic ear on the topic of Draco's father, which is above and beyond anything she's required to do. Incarcerated parents mean he'll be alone at the manor for Christmas. He'll have the house elves for company, but to serve their household meant perfection, and thus Draco was not likely to see a living soul unless he called for one to perform a task. Enter Potter's relentless pursuit to be cheerful and inclusive. He's having some grand night of holiday debauchery at Grimmauld Place and inviting every single person he's ever met, including Draco. Draco knows he cannot accept. Guilt is a very inconvenient preoccupation, and it seems Draco wants a career of it. The holiday season sneaks up on her because Hermione has thrown herself into actually enjoying her education and figuring out what to do with her bargaining attraction to a person incapable of reconciling his emotional vulnerability. Though she's made the pointed remark on more than one occasion that they're both without family for the moment, it's not entirely true. Hermione's parents may be a world away and ignorant to her existence, but she has a home and a family for the holidays. Home is now Grimmauld Place and Harry, her brother. They spent Christmas Day at the Burrow too and try to celebrate something in the face of missing Fred and so many others. But Christmas Eve will be all merrymaking and irresponsible drinking if Harry has anything to say about it. Hermione sees Malfoy tense each time Harry brings it up. She resists pleading with him to join, and pushing someone like him, a skittish bird poised to fly after the slightest provocation, will only end in frustration. He's welcome in her orbit. She's made that embarrassingly obvious, with hands that say yes and glances that say please. Draco accepts her touches but never returns them, his hands always retreating like obedient troops. Her latest tactic is a Christmas gift, given to him on the last day of term while trying not to throw up from nerves as he pulls the wrapping off the beloved book. "It's a Muggle story, so you probably wouldn't have heard of it." "I haven't," he says and flips through it in interest. "It's one of my favorites, especially this time of year." Hermione reaches over, tracing the cover with revenant fingers. "My dad He'd read it to me and my mum every Christmas Eve. Knew all these different character voices and everything. Thank you. His gratitude and the accompanying stare are stupidly charged, but nothing will come of it. He's good, too good, at denying himself these days. They sit side by side on the train, bodies pressed together from hips to thighs to knees, and he's quiet. Everyone knows this about him now, in the way they know other formerly boisterous personalities like Parvati Patil or Dennis Creevy now only speak when spoken to. He'll be alone in that horrifying house for Christmas. The thought makes her want to grab his hand and beg him not to return, offer up one of the spare rooms at Grimmauld. Hermione understands him well enough to know he's returning to a personal prism and mausoleum in one. The rest of their compartment practically skip away merrily when the train reaches King's Cross. Ginny tugs Harry excitedly by the hand and once shares an awkward, blushing farewell with Daphne. Draco fiddles with the strap on his trunk and refuses to meet her eyes. "You'll read it, the book I gave you?" "Sure, Granger." "And I'll see you at Harry's party?" "Maybe." She wants to suggest every possible way they could stay in contact. Hermione opens her mouth to say she'll write, or that the flu will be open, or that they both have apparition licenses, when Ginny's advice floats across her mind. "Just be patient and keep showing up for him. Malfoy will come around eventually." But Hermione doesn't want to be patient. She wants to yell in his unfairly attractive face that nothing good ever comes from this prolonged self-flagellation. Instead, she murmurs, "Happy Christmas, Draco," and leaves to catch up with Harry. Draco's never experienced heartache before. He's had illusions shattered and dreams dashed, sure. This is a new knife in his chest. He has zero intentions of showing up to Potter's party, but he sends some barrels of mulled wine from the Manor's elves. It's a half measure to make up for his absence, and a polite gesture a la his mother's etiquette lessons. Draco's parents always allowed him a small glass on Christmas. A thrilling little taste of adulthood, and generally preferable to the more gruesome aspects of growing up he's had thrust upon him. Like now, playing at head of the household in a manner that feels haunted. Grotesque memories echo all around, ricocheting off tapestries and portraits and stained drawing-room floors. Draco stays in his own room mostly and takes meals in the lesser dining room. He'll never eat in the other one again. Idleness buzzes through his veins as the days drag on. He could have stayed at Hogwarts, but a single-minded desire to reclaim his family home for the holiday season, to force peace back into his life, chains him here. But his hand itches to summon a quill and parchment. His body hums with the urge to seek out Granger's company. Draco eventually opens the book from Granger, desperate for some connection to a surprisingly happy existence back at Hogwarts. Her gift is not quite the positive experience he anticipates. He reads all Christmas Eve morning and grows sullier by the hour. If his manor felt haunted the last few days, it's nothing compared to how he feels mid-read. She gives him a fucking ghost story. More than that, she's shoved a morality lesson right in his face. Typical Granger, no subtlety whatsoever. He finishes the book well before dinner and puts his unfortunately sentimental choice of bookmark on a particular page. The words won't leave his brain. Neither will she. Draco wants to send her a howler, but knows he'll regret it immediately. Besides, he wants to hear this explanation straight from her lips. He flees to Grimmauld, querying both the book and his resolve to be angry. With her pushiness to accept things he has no right deserving, her insistence that he's allowed to touch her anywhere outside of his private fantasies. Draco follows the sound of rambunctious young adults to a parlour on the second floor. She's in an armchair in the far corner with a glass of his family's mulled wine in her hand. Something twists low in his abdomen as he realizes. He knows, at this moment, how Granger tastes. Her grip tightens around the glass when she spots him hovering on the threshold. A moment-ruining Potter stumbles out of nowhere, shoves a drink in his hands and shouts, "You made it!" Several others greet him raucously, but Draco only has eyes for her. She crosses over to him, eyes bright but smile tentative. "Hi, you're here."
"So I am."
He clips and her smile falters.
"Can we talk somewhere less?"
He gestures around the room filled with loud laughter, music, and too many couples making use of the hanging mistletoe. Granger leads him to her bedroom. It's filled with the physical pieces of her she's shared verbally. Photos of her obliviated parents, SPEW badges, horribly knitted hats, Gryffindor paraphernalia, books, and more books. She downs the rest of her drink and vanishes the empty cup before sitting on the bed, gazing up expectantly. Draco sips the wine, drawing strength from the familiar drink. He can't sit on that bed, can't occupy such an intimate space with her, not before he sorts through the mess she's made with him. Glass deposited on her side table, Draco paces a few lengths, working up to composure and reason while maintaining justified anger. She waits him out, a beautiful study in patience, and he suddenly redirects his fury inward when he realizes he constantly demands patience from her. He stops in front of her and pulls the book from his jacket.
"Why did you give me this?"
he asks abruptly, causing an adorable wrinkle of her nose. "The book?"
"Yes, this bloody book about a miserable rich arsehole who sees the error of his ways in time to celebrate Christmas. Oh, I get it, quite thematically appropriate, if a bit heavy-handed. I mean, Merlin. Yes, I see the parallels between me and Scrooge, and that's before we even get into the rest of the stand-ins. The Weasleys are the Cratchits. That one was a dead-on, fine. And Potter, he's meant to be the nephew, or maybe Fezziwig, whichever happy-go-lucky idiot fits better, and the ghost."
Granger interrupts with an exacerbated laugh. "Draco, I didn't give you a gift so you'd have an existential crisis and then perform a book report. I gave you that book so you'd have a reminder of me while we were apart."
"A reminder of you?" he sneers. "Like I need one."
Her face falls as she mistakes self-deprecation for cruelty. Draco shakes his head and surrenders to damnation, sinking onto the mattress beside her in a show of crumbling willpower.
"I already have this."
Draco removes his book, dangling the scarlet ribbon.
"Which is also unnecessary. Your absence more than did the job."
Granger takes her ribbon, pulling and twisting it through a nervous grip. "The book wasn't intended as a lesson," she says. "I was just sharing a part of myself with you, since we're not— You don't let me." She releases the ribbon as her fingers curl around his wrist.
"No," Draco gently corrects, "I don't let myself."
"Why?" His eyes drop to the pages in his lap, and he recites the few lines he's already almost memorized.
"I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it."
Draco expects pretty, pitying eyes. She rolls them instead. "Are you quite done feeling sorry for yourself?" Granger tucks the book from him and flips to another page. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." She smacks up at him, so cheeky and teasing that the only proper retaliation is to wipe that expression off her face. Draco cups her jaw and kisses her. He's slightly wrong about how she tastes. The flavor of mulled wine is there, but this first kiss hurtles him into Christmases past and sumptuous, decadent desserts that would accompany the malt drink. Things worth the wait to taste. Deepening the kiss yanks him back to the present, to the tingle of warm spices on her tongue. She is warmth incarnated, and entreats him to burn in the pleasant heat of cinnamon and cloves. Christmas present is breaths lost to their searching mouth, to wandering hands that no longer obey self-enforced limits and now roam to clutch and caress. He's had too little to drink, not near enough brandy and red wine, to feel this dazed. Light-headed from her soft lips, dizzy from her nails raking his scalp, and then a surrender to gravity as her determined hands push him backwards. She pulls her jumper over her head, then unbuttons his shirt, and he has just enough sense left to murmur, "I've never." And she's kind enough to reply, "That's all right," and keep right on kissing him as they undress each other. Straddling his thighs instead of his hips, she seeks permission for more, flicking her gaze to his cock. "Show me how you like it." It's just his hand for a few painstaking moments, and she watches him stroke like the star pupil she is. Then it's her small hand over his moving together. Then she takes over all on her own, like she's done with everything else in life. "Please touch me." He skims his fingers to the apex of her thighs, coaxing them inside as she instructs him. She's as warm and wet here as her mouth. Draco wants to taste this part of her too. Another time, he thinks, because this is far from a one-off. Together they discover the joy in first touches, in new pleasures, and the sounds that accompany them. He comes first, not bothering with embarrassment over this, as it lets him concentrate on everything Granger. Clenching around his fingers, hips rocking and his name falling from parted lips. They don't return to the party, and no one disturbs them. Peace. Draco didn't feel it back in May at the end of the battle, nor when he returned to a free home, nor to a rebuilt Hogwarts. Peace begins now, on a lumpy mattress with reassuring lips pressing periodically against his shoulder or neck. Contentment sparks from his confident hold of her smaller frame molding into him. Acceptance destroys the tension found between deserving and undeserving, as Draco decides withholding bliss is needlessly foolish. When he wakes in the morning, Granger greets him with a soft kiss of Christmases yet to come. Draco tastes a future within reach and new traditions made with her. The end. Thank you for listening to Strange Birds by HeyJude19, read by Ella Max Mavella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on AO3, YouTube or Spotify.